The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Children's Hospital hummed their monotonous song overhead, a sound I'd learned to tune out over the past 14 hours of my shift. My feet throbbed in my worn sneakers, each step sending sharp reminders up through my calves that I'd been standing far too long. The smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with something sweeter, almost sickly, that I could never quite identify but had learned to associate with this place. Through the large windows of the third-floor pediatric wing, I could see the New York skyline turning amber and gold in the late afternoon sun, a beautiful backdrop to the worst day of my life. I adjusted the tray of medications in my hands, double-checking the chart for room 312. Theo Reyes. My son's name stared back at me in clinical black and white, reducing 2 years of fierce love and desperate struggle to a patient number and diagnosis code. Acute appendicitis with complications. The words had sounded so sterile when Dr. Morrison had explained them to me this morning, his kind eyes doing nothing to soften the blow of what came next. Surgery. Urgent surgery. And a price tag that made my vision swim. My reflection caught in the glass door as I approached Theo's room. I looked like a ghost of myself. Dark circles under my eyes, my hair scraped back into a messy ponytail, the scrubs that marked me as a nurse's aide hanging loose on my frame. I'd lost weight over the past few months, too stressed to eat, too tired to care. At 26, I looked a decade older, worn down by single motherhood and the constant weight of survival. Through the window, I could see Theo sleeping in the small hospital bed, his tiny body almost swallowed by the white sheets. Someone had brought him a stuffed rabbit from the pediatric playroom. It sat next to his pillow, its button eyes watching over my baby as he slept. The IV in his small arm made my chest tighten. He'd cried when they'd inserted it, his little face scrunched up in confusion and pain, calling for me while I held him and whispered lies about how it wouldn't hurt. "Taylor?" a voice called behind me. I turned to see Sarah Chen, one of the senior nurses, approaching with a tablet in her hands. Her expression was carefully neutral, which immediately set off alarms in my head. "Dr. Morrison wants to see you in his office." "Now?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "I just need to give Theo his medication and—" "I'll handle Theo's meds," she interrupted gently. Dr. Morrison said it was urgent. The walk to the administrative wing felt like a death march. I knew what this meeting was about. They wanted to know how I planned to pay for Theo's surgery. The hospital's charity program had standards, requirements, documentation that I couldn't provide because I'd been living off the books for 2 years, working cash jobs and avoiding any paper trail that might lead back to him. Dr. Morrison's office was small but comfortable, with diplomas on the walls and family photos on the desk. He gestured for me to sit, his expression sympathetic but firm. "Taylor, I won't waste your time. Theo needs surgery within the next 12 hours. The infection is spreading and we can't wait any longer." "I understand," I whispered, my hands twisting in my lap. "The surgery, the hospital stay, the medications, we're looking at close to $60,000. Even with our charity program, you'd still be responsible for at least $30,000. And that's if we can get the paperwork approved, which given your employment situation." He trailed off, not unkindly. $30,000. I might as well have told him I needed $30 million. My entire checking account held $1,247, the sum total of my existence. "What if I can't pay?" The question hurt to ask. "We'll still perform the surgery," Dr. Morrison assured me quickly. "Theo won't be denied care, but we'll need to set up a payment plan, and if you default—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I knew about medical debt, about garnished wages and ruined credit, about the trap that ensnared people like me who were already barely surviving. "Give me an hour," I heard myself say. "Just 1 hour." He nodded slowly. 1 hour. "But Taylor, if you're thinking of running, of taking Theo somewhere else, his condition is serious. He needs the best care we can provide, and he needs it soon." I stood on shaking legs. "I'm not running. I promise. Back in the hallway, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. It was an old model. The screen cracked across one corner, but it worked. That was all that mattered. I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the screen. For 2 years, I'd told myself I would never do this. Never reach out. Never give him the satisfaction of knowing I needed him. I'd run from Thomas Benedetti when I was 8 weeks pregnant, terrified of the world he lived in, the violence that followed him like a shadow. I'd watched him break a man's arm over a business dispute. I'd seen the guns his associates carried. I'd overheard phone conversations about shipments and territories and people who'd disappeared for crossing him, and I'd loved him anyway. God help me. Loved him with a desperate, consuming intensity that had made me ignore every red flag, every warning sign, every instinct screaming that this man was dangerous. But when I'd found out about the baby, when I'd held that positive pregnancy test in my hands, something had shifted. It wasn't just about me anymore. So I'd left. Disappeared in the middle of the night with a bag of clothes and every penny I could scrape together. Changed my name, or at least started using my mother's maiden name instead of the one on my birth certificate. Found work in places that didn't ask too many questions. And I'd never looked back. Except now. Now I had no choice. My contact list was nearly empty, just a few coworkers and the number for Theo's pediatrician. But I had one number memorized, had recited it to myself 1,000 times in the dark hours of the night when I was alone and scared, and wondering if I'd made the right choice. With shaking fingers, I typed it into my phone. The message I crafted was simple, stripped of everything except the essential truth. Our son is dying. St. Catherine's Children's Hospital, room 312. He needs surgery. I need $60,000. Please. I attached a photo I'd taken earlier of Theo sleeping, his face pale against the white pillow, the IV visible in his small arm. My finger hovered over the send button for an eternity and a heartbeat. Once I did this, there was no going back. Thomas would know where I was, would know about Theo, would insert himself back into my life with all the force and inevitability of a hurricane. But what choice did I have? Watch my son die to protect my pride, to maintain the illusion of independence I'd built over 2 years of hiding? I pressed send. The message delivered with a soft swoosh, and I leaned against the cool wall of the corridor, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. What had I done? What if he didn't respond? What if he did? What if... My phone rang. Not a text back. A call. The screen showed an unknown number, but I knew who it was with the certainty of instinct. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone before I managed to answer. Hello? My voice was barely a whisper. Where are you? Thomas's voice. 2 years hadn't changed it. Deep, rough-edged, carrying an authority that expected immediate obedience. Just hearing it sent me spinning back to nights wrapped in his arms, mornings waking up to his face, the way he'd made me feel safe and terrified in equal measure. I'm at the hospital. St. Catherine's Children's. I know where you are. Stay there. Don't move. I'm coming. Thomas, But he'd already hung up. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my knees pulled up to my chest, phone clutched in both hands. What had I just set in motion? My coworkers passed by, some giving me curious looks, but no one stopped. They probably thought I was just another overwhelmed family member, breaking down under the stress of a sick child. If only they knew. Time moved strangely after that. I returned to Theo's room, unable to stay away. He was still sleeping, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. I smoothed his dark hair back from his forehead, hair the exact shade of his father's. He had Thomas's hair, his strong jawline already visible even at 2 years old, the shape of his eyes. But his temperament was all mine, gentle and thoughtful, quick to laugh and slow to anger. Your daddy's coming, I whispered to him. He's going to help us. Would Thomas even believe Theo was his? We'd been careful, but not careful enough. And I'd never told him about the pregnancy. He might think I was lying, trying to trap him or extort money from him. The thought made my stomach turn. But then, I looked at our son, at the unmistakable stamp of Thomas's features on that small face, and knew that denial would last approximately 3 seconds after he walked through that door. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Helicopter inbound. 30 minutes. Have your son ready for transfer. Transfer? My fingers flew over the screen. He can't be moved. He needs surgery here. The response came immediately, bringing a surgical team to him. Best pediatric surgeon on the East Coast. Clear it with hospital administration. I stared at the message in disbelief. He was bringing the surgeon to us? The sheer audacity of it, the impossible logistics, the cost that must involve it, was quintessentially Thomas. A problem arose. He threw money and power at it until it bent to his will. The next 20 minutes were chaos. Dr. Morrison was skeptical when I told him a private surgical team was coming. But one phone call from someone in Thomas's organization to someone in hospital administration changed everything. Suddenly, we were being moved to a private surgical suite. Staff were appearing from nowhere, prepping equipment, running new tests on Theo, who woke up confused and frightened. "Mama?" he asked, his little voice thick with sleep and medication. "What's happening?" "We're moving you to a different room, baby," I soothed, walking alongside his bed as they wheeled it through the corridors. "To make you feel better. It hurts," he whimpered, his hand finding mine. "I know, sweetheart. I know. But we're going to fix it. I promise." The private suite they moved us to was nothing like the standard pediatric room we'd been in. This was luxury I associated with 5-star hotels, not hospitals. A full sitting area with a couch and chairs, a private bathroom, walls painted in soothing colors instead of institutional beige. The bed they transferred Theo to was state-of-the-art, equipped with monitoring systems I'd only seen in the ICU. And then I heard it, the distinctive whump 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 of helicopter rotors, growing louder as it approached. I moved to the window, watching as a sleek black helicopter with no visible markings descended toward the hospital's rooftop helipad. My heart was in my throat. Staff members I didn't recognize but who moved with obvious authority began arriving. A woman in scrubs introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Volker, pediatric surgeon. A man set up a portable surgical station with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Nurses appeared, each one clearly at the top of their field, each one moving with the confidence of people who'd done this countless times. "Mrs. Reyes?" Dr. Volker approached me with a kind smile. "Or is it Miss?" "It's actually Reynolds," I corrected automatically. "Taylor Reynolds. Ms. Reynolds, I've reviewed your son's scans and blood work. The appendicitis has progressed, but it's very treatable. We're going to take excellent care of him." "How much is this going to cost?" I couldn't help asking. Her smile turned sympathetic. "That's already been handled. Your only job is to be here for your son." Already been handled. Just like that. $60,000. Maybe more. Just handled. The relief was so overwhelming that I felt lightheaded. But underneath it was something darker. Dread. Because nothing from Thomas Benedetti came without strings attached. I heard him before I saw him. His voice in the corridor outside, giving instructions in that tone that expected immediate compliance. My whole body tensed, every muscle going tight with a combination of anticipation and fear I couldn't quite name. Then he was there, filling the doorway with his presence in a way that had nothing to do with physical size, and everything to do with the sheer force of his personality. Thomas Benedetti. Still heartbreakingly handsome, his dark hair slightly longer than he'd worn it 2 years ago, falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger than his 32 years. He wore dark jeans and a black shirt under a leather jacket, dressed down, but still radiating wealth and power. His eyes, dark and intense, scanned the room until they landed on me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The air between us felt electric, charged with 2 years of absence and anger, and words never spoken. Then his gaze shifted to the bed, to the small figure sleeping there, and I watched his entire world realign itself in real time. His face went through a series of expressions so quickly I almost missed them. Shock, recognition, wonder, and finally, something fierce and possessive that made my breath catch. "That's him," he said quietly. Not a question, a statement of fact. "Yes," I whispered. "That's Theo, your son." Thomas didn't move from the doorway for what felt like an eternity, his eyes fixed on Theo with an intensity that made something in my chest ache. I watched him catalog every detail of our son's face, seeing the recognition dawn as he mapped his own features onto that small sleeping form. His jaw clenched, the muscle ticking in a way I remembered too well. It meant he was processing something overwhelming, fighting to maintain control. 2 years, he said finally, his voice low and rough. 2 years you kept him from me. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I had my reasons. His eyes snapped to mine, and the fury I saw there made me take an involuntary step backward. "Your reasons," he repeated, each word clipped and precise. "You had reasons to deny me my son, to let me think you'd simply disappeared, maybe dead in a ditch somewhere, to rob me of 2 years of his life. You broke a man's arm in front of me." I shot back, my voice barely above a whisper but trembling with remembered fear. "Over a business disagreement. I couldn't bring a child into that world, Thomas. I couldn't." "So you brought him into this instead?" He gestured around us, at the hospital room that represented everything I'd been running from. "Working yourself to death, unable to afford basic medical care for our son, that was better?" The accusation stung because it was true. I'd been so focused on keeping Theo away from Thomas's dangerous world that I'd created a different kind of danger. The kind that came from poverty, from instability, from being one medical emergency away from total disaster. Before I could respond, "Doctor," Volker stepped forward with the easy authority of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "Mr. Benedetti, Ms. Reynolds, I understand this is an emotional situation, but we need to focus on Theo right now. He's stable, but he needs surgery within the next few hours." Thomas's expression transformed instantly, the personal fury shuddering behind professional control. "What do you need?" "I need to prep him, run a few more tests, and get him into surgery. The procedure will take approximately 2 hours. He'll need to stay in the hospital for at least a week afterward, possibly longer depending on how he heals." "Whatever he needs," Thomas said without hesitation. "The best of everything. I want round-the-clock nursing staff, private security outside his door, and daily updates from the surgical team." "Private security?" I interjected. "Thomas, this is a hospital, not one of your—" "There are people who would use him to get to me," Thomas interrupted, turning to face me fully. His eyes had gone cold, calculating. The man I'd loved was buried somewhere beneath the crime boss, and it terrified me. From the moment I walked into this building, anyone who was watching knows I have a weakness now, a vulnerability. So yes, Taylor, private security, armed, trained, and vetted by my people. The casual way he discussed threats against our 2-year-old son made my blood run cold. This was exactly why I'd run, because in Thomas's world, even children were chess pieces, leverage, targets. "I need to speak with Ms. Reynolds privately," Thomas said to Dr. Volker, though his tone made it clear it wasn't a request. 5 minutes before you prep him." Dr. Volker glanced at me, and I nodded reluctantly. She and her team filed out, leaving me alone with Thomas and our sleeping son. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "How long?" Thomas asked quietly. "How long have you been working here?" 6 months, I admitted. Before that, I was waitressing in Brooklyn. Before that, cleaning houses in Queens. We moved around a lot. Hiding. Surviving, I corrected. There's a difference. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I wouldn't have taken care of you? You think I would have let you struggle like this?" "I think you would have owned me," I said, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. "Owned us. The way you own everything and everyone in your life." "I couldn't live like that, Thomas. I couldn't raise a child like that." He took a step toward me, and I held my ground, even though every instinct screamed at me to retreat. He stopped close enough that I could smell his cologne, the familiar scent triggering a cascade of memories I'd worked hard to bury. Late nights in his penthouse, his hands in my hair, the way he'd whispered my name like a prayer and a curse combined. "You don't get to make that choice for me," he said softly, and the gentleness was somehow more frightening than his anger. "Not anymore. That's my son in that bed. My blood. And I will do whatever it takes to protect him. From anyone. Including you, if necessary." The threat hung in the air between us, unspoken but unmistakable. I'd declared war the moment I'd run, and now that he'd found me, found Theo, there would be consequences. "What do you want from me?" I asked, hating how my voice shook. "Right now? Nothing. You stay with Theo, you help him through this surgery and recovery, and when he's well." Thomas paused, his dark eyes boring into mine. "When he's well, we're going to have a very long conversation about the future. Our future. As a family." "We're not a family," I protested weakly. "We are now." He turned back to Theo, reaching out to gently touch our son's hand. The gesture was so tender, so at odds with the dangerous man I knew him to be, that it made my throat tighten. I missed his birth, his first word, his first step. 2 years, Taylor. You can't give those back to me, but I'll be damned if I miss another moment. Dr. Volker knocked softly before entering, her team behind her. "We need to take him now." What followed was a blur of activity. They transferred Theo to a surgical gurney, careful of his IV lines and monitors. He woke briefly, his eyes finding mine in confusion and fear. "Mama?" "I'm right here, baby," I assured him, walking alongside as they wheeled him toward the surgical suite. "These nice people are going to make your tummy stop hurting." "Will it hurt?" His bottom lip trembled. "You'll be asleep," Dr. Volker explained with a warm smile, "like a very special nap. And when you wake up, you'll feel so much better." They reached the double doors that led to the surgical wing. I couldn't go any further. A nurse gently touched my arm. "We'll take excellent care of him, Ms. Reynolds. The waiting room is just down the hall. Someone will update you every 30 minutes. I kissed Theo's forehead, breathing in his little boy smell of apple shampoo and hospital soap. "I love you so much. You're so brave." "Love you, Mama," he mumbled, already drowsy from the pre-surgical medication they'd given him. Then they were through the doors, and he was gone. I stood in the hallway, suddenly feeling more alone than I had in 2 years. But I wasn't alone. Thomas was there, a solid presence at my side. And when my knees threatened to give out, his hand was on my elbow, steadying me. "He'll be fine," Thomas said with absolute certainty. "Volker is the best. I made sure of it." "How did you get her here so fast?" I asked, letting him guide me toward the waiting room. "She's supposed to be one of the top pediatric surgeons in the country. You can't just summon someone like that." "I can when I'm paying her triple her annual salary for one surgery," Thomas replied matter-of-factly. "Money and influence, Taylor. They open doors. Even operating room doors." The waiting room was empty except for two men in dark suits who screamed security detail. Thomas nodded to them, and they took up positions outside the door, leaving us alone in the sterile space with its uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. I collapsed into a chair, the adrenaline that had been sustaining me finally draining away. Exhaustion crashed over me in waves. When had I last slept? Really slept? Not just dozed fitfully in the chair next to Theo's hospital bed? I couldn't remember. Thomas sat beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. We sat in silence for several minutes before he spoke. Tell me about him. Everything. I want to know everything. So I did. Maybe it was exhaustion, or fear, or the desperate need to talk about something other than surgery and danger. I told him about Theo's birth, how he'd come 3 weeks early and scared me half to death. About his first word, which had been dog when he'd seen one in the park. About how he loved construction trucks and refused to sleep without his stuffed elephant. About his laugh, which was loud and infectious and could light up an entire room. Thomas listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, but I saw his hands clench when I described going into labor alone, taking a taxi to the hospital because I had no one to call. I saw something flash in his eyes when I mentioned the times I'd had to choose between buying groceries and paying rent, the weeks we'd survived on rice and beans and whatever I could get from the food bank. "You should have called me," he said when I finally ran out of words. "No matter what you thought of me, no matter how afraid you were, you should have called." "Would you have let me go?" I asked. "If I'd told you I was pregnant and wanted out, would you have just let me walk away?" His silence was answer enough. A nurse appeared in the doorway, breaking the tension. "Ms. Reynolds, Theo's in surgery now. Everything is progressing smoothly. Dr. Volker says his appendix was inflamed but intact, which is good news. They're removing it now." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you." The nurse disappeared, and I sagged back in my chair, some of the fear unclenching from my chest. He was going to be okay. My baby was going to be okay. "You're exhausted," Thomas observed. "When did you last sleep?" "I don't remember," I admitted. "Yesterday morning, maybe? Before we came to the ER. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then pocketed it again. "There's a hotel across the street. I'm having a room prepared for you. After the surgery, when Theo is in recovery, you're going to go there and sleep." "I'm not leaving him," I protested automatically. "You'll be 10 minutes away, and I'll be with him," Thomas countered. "You're no good to him if you collapse from exhaustion. And you will collapse, Taylor. I can see it in your eyes." I wanted to argue, but he was right. I was running on empty, had been for days. "I don't have money for a hotel room. It's already paid for. Everything is paid for. Medical bills, hotel, meals, whatever you need. Consider it back payment for 2 years of child support I didn't know I owed." The reminder of those 2 years made me flinch. "Thomas, we're not doing this now." He cut me off, but his tone was gentler than before. "Right now, the only thing that matters is Theo. The rest. We'll figure out the rest later." My phone buzzed. I pulled it out to see a text from Sarah Chen, my supervisor. "Heard about Theo. Take all the time you need. We're covering your shifts." "Did you?" I started to ask Thomas. "I may have made a generous donation to the hospital's staff relief fund," he admitted. "Enough that they could afford to be understanding about your situation. More money solving problems. More of Thomas's influence reshaping reality around him." I should have been grateful, but instead I felt the walls closing in. Every debt incurred, every favor accepted, was another chain binding me to him. Another nurse appeared with an update. Surgery was progressing well. Theo's vitals were stable. They expected to be finished within the hour. The The waiting felt interminable. Thomas made phone calls, his voice low and clipped as he issued orders to people I couldn't see. Rearranging his empire, I assumed, to accommodate this unexpected development. A son, an heir. In his world, that meant something different than it did in mine. "Who else knows?" I asked suddenly. "About Theo?" Thomas looked up from his phone. "My head of security, my personal physician, the people I needed to mobilize to get that surgical team here. Why?" "You said people would use him to get to you. Who? Who are these people?" His expression darkened. "I have rivals, Taylor. Other families who would love to see me weakened or destroyed. The Russians have been pushing into my territory for months. There's a new player from Chicago trying to establish connections in New York. Any of them would see a child as perfect leverage." "So what? We just hide forever? Look over our shoulders for the rest of our lives?" "No," Thomas said firmly. "We show them that touching what's mine is a death sentence. We make an example of anyone who even thinks about it, and we protect Theo with everything I have." The casual way he discussed violence made my stomach turn, but I couldn't deny the small, traitorous part of me that felt safer knowing Thomas's power was now focused on protecting our son. Dr. Volker appeared in the doorway, still in her surgical scrubs, and I was on my feet before she could speak. "He did beautifully," she said with a warm smile. "The appendix was inflamed, but we got it in time. No rupture, no complications. He's in recovery now, still sleeping off the anesthesia, but he should wake up in the next hour or so." The relief was so overwhelming I actually swayed on my feet. Thomas's hand was immediately at my back, steadying me. "Can I see him?" I asked. "Give us 15 minutes to get him settled in his room. Then yes. He'll be groggy, probably nauseous, but that's normal. We'll keep him on IV antibiotics for a few days. Monitor for infection. But I expect a full recovery." After she left, I turned to Thomas and did something I never thought I'd do again. I let him pull me into his arms. I let myself lean against his chest and feel the solid strength of him. Let myself take comfort in his presence. Just for a moment. Just until I could breathe again. "Thank you," I whispered against his shirt. "For getting her here. For saving him." His arms tightened around me. "You never have to thank me for taking care of our son," he said quietly. "That's what fathers do." Theo looked impossibly small in the recovery room bed, his face pale against the white pillow, a new IV line running into his hand alongside the one that had been there before. Monitors beeped steadily around him, displaying numbers I'd learned to read during my months working at the hospital. Heart rate, oxygen saturation, blood pressure. All normal, all stable. But seeing my baby like this, still unconscious from anesthesia, made my chest feel like someone had wrapped it in barbed wire. I pulled a chair close to his bedside and took his small hand in mine, careful not to disturb the IV. His fingers were warm, his pulse steady beneath my thumb. Alive. Healthy. Going to be fine. I repeated it like a mantra, trying to convince the terrified mother part of my brain that the crisis had passed. Thomas stood at the foot of the bed, his hands gripping the rail with white knuckles. He hadn't stopped watching Theo since we'd entered the room, his eyes tracking every rise and fall of our son's chest, as if he could will him to keep breathing through sheer force of concentration. "He has your nose," I said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. "I noticed it when he was born. This perfect little nose, and I thought, that's Thomas's nose." "He has your mouth," Thomas replied, his voice rough, "and your chin, the way it's slightly pointed." It was surreal, cataloging our features and our child's face together. A moment of domesticity that felt stolen from another life, one where Thomas and I had built something normal instead of destructive, one where I hadn't run in the middle of the night with our child growing inside me. "Mr. Benedetti?" A nurse appeared in the doorway, young and nervous. "There's a call for you. They said it was urgent." Thomas's jaw clenched in frustration, but he nodded curtly. "I'll take it in the hallway." He looked at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. "Don't go anywhere." It wasn't a request. It was a command, softly spoken but absolute. I watched him leave, his broad shoulders filling the doorway before he disappeared into the corridor beyond. Alone with Theo, I let myself cry. Quiet, careful tears that I'd been holding back since the moment Dr. Morrison had told me my son needed surgery I couldn't afford. I cried for the fear, for the desperation that had driven me to contact the one man I'd sworn to never see again. I cried for the 2 years Theo had lived without a father, and for the complicated future that stretched ahead of us now that Thomas knew he existed. "Mama?" The small, groggy voice made me jerk upright, swiping hastily at my wet cheeks. Theo's eyes were open, unfocused and confused but awake. Relief crashed over me so powerfully I felt dizzy with it. "Hey, baby," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady and cheerful. "You're okay. You're all done. How do you feel?" "Tired," he mumbled, his words slightly slurred from the lingering anesthesia. "Tummy hurts." "I know, sweetheart. But the doctors fixed it. You're going to feel better soon, I promise." I smoothed his dark hair back from his forehead, the familiar gesture soothing us both. "Thirsty," he said, his bottom lip trembling. I pressed the call button for the nurse, who appeared within seconds with ice chips that Theo was allowed to have. I fed them to him slowly, one at a time, watching his small throat work as he swallowed. Such a simple thing, but after the terror of the past 24 hours, I found profound gratitude in it. "Where are we?" Theo asked, looking around the unfamiliar room with growing awareness. "This isn't our house." "We're in the hospital, remember? You had a bad tummy ache, and the doctors had to do a special operation to make it better." His eyes welled with tears, and I could see the pain and confusion warring in his small face. "Want to go home?" "Soon, baby. A few more days, and then we'll go home." The lie tasted bitter. I had no idea where home was anymore. Our tiny apartment in Queens felt 1,000,000 miles away, and I had the sinking feeling that Thomas wouldn't let us simply return to our old life. Not now. Not after this. Thomas reappeared in the doorway, and Theo's attention shifted to him. I watched my son study this stranger with open curiosity, taking in the expensive clothes, the commanding presence, the dark hair that matched his own. "Who's that?" Theo asked me, but his eyes never left Thomas. I opened my mouth, closed it, completely unprepared for this moment. What did I say? How did I explain to a 2-year-old that this man was his father, that I'd kept them apart for his entire life? Thomas solved the problem by stepping forward, his movements careful and measured, like he was approaching a skittish animal. He crouched down so he was at Theo's eye level, bringing his imposing frame down to something less overwhelming. "Hi, Theo," he said, and I was startled by the gentleness in his voice. "My name is Thomas. I'm your dad." Theo looked at me for confirmation, and I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "My dad?" Theo repeated, testing the word. "Like Marcus's dad? He picks him up from daycare sometimes." "Yes," Thomas said, his voice slightly unsteady. "Like that. I'm sorry I haven't been around before, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." "Okay," Theo said, with the easy acceptance of a toddler for whom the world was still full of magical possibilities. Then, with devastating simplicity, he held out his small hand. "Hi, Dad." I watched Thomas's face transform. The hardness melted away, replaced by something raw and vulnerable that I'd only seen a handful of times in all the months we'd been together. His large hand swallowed Theo's as he shook it gently. "Hi, son," Thomas whispered. The moment stretched between them, father and son meeting for the first time. while I sat to the side feeling like an intruder in something sacred. This was what I'd stolen from both of them. 2 years of moments like this. 2 years of Thomas knowing his child, of Theo having a father. The guilt was crushing. Theo's eyes started to droop again, the medication and his body's need to heal pulling him back toward sleep. "Will you stay?" he asked Thomas, fighting to keep his eyes open. "When I wake up?" "I'll be right here," Thomas promised. "I'm not leaving." Within minutes, Theo was asleep again, his breathing deep and even. Thomas stood slowly, his eyes never leaving our son's face. When he finally looked at me, I saw accusation there, but also understanding, a complicated tangle of emotions that mirrored my own. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Really talk. Not just about logistics and immediate needs. About everything." I nodded, too exhausted to argue. "Okay, but not here. Not in front of him, even if he's sleeping." Thomas gestured to one of his security men, who appeared instantly in the doorway. "Stay with him. No one enters this room except medical staff that's been cleared. Understood?" "Yes, sir." We moved to a small consultation room down the hall, private and empty. The moment the door closed behind us, the fragile truce that had held since Theo's surgery began to crack. 2 years, Thomas said again, and I realized this was going to become a refrain, the measurement of all I'd taken from him. 2 years, Taylor. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To find out you have a child, and in the same breath realize you've missed half his life? "I was protecting him," I said, but the words sounded weak even to my ears. "You broke someone's arm, Thomas, over money. What was I supposed to think? That you'd be a good father? That Theo would be safe in your world?" "That wasn't about money," Thomas snapped, his control fraying. "That was about respect. About a man who tried to steal from me and endangered my people in the process. You saw one moment, one incident, and decided you knew everything about me." "I knew enough," I shot back. "I knew you were involved in things that got people killed. I knew your business required armed guards and encrypted phones and meetings in the middle of the night. What kind of life is that for a child?" "A better life than the one you gave him." Thomas's voice rose, and he visibly struggled to rein himself back in. "Working yourself to exhaustion, living paycheck to paycheck, unable to afford basic medical care for your son. Our son. That was better?" The accusation hit its mark because it was true. I'd been so focused on keeping Theo away from Thomas's world that I'd created a different kind of danger. The kind that came from poverty and instability and being one crisis away from homelessness. "I did the best I could," I whispered. "You did the best you could alone," Thomas corrected, his tone softening slightly. "You didn't have to be alone. You chose to be. You made that choice for both of us." I sank into one of the uncomfortable chairs, suddenly too tired to stand. "So what now? You've found us. You know about Theo. What happens next?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his expression calculating in a way that reminded me forcefully that beneath the concerned father was a man who ran a criminal empire through strategic thinking and ruthless decision-making. "You and Theo move into my penthouse," he said finally. "Full-time security. Everything you need provided for. You don't work. Your only job is taking care of our son and letting me be a father to him." "Absolutely not," I said immediately. "I'm not going to be kept like some mistress in a golden cage." "You'd prefer your cage in Queens?" Thomas asked pointedly. "That apartment with the broken heater and the neighbors who deal drugs in the stairwell? That's better?" "It's mine," I insisted. "It's my life, my choices, my independence." "Your independence nearly cost our son his life," Thomas said brutally. "If you'd been able to afford regular checkups, a good pediatrician, his appendicitis would have been caught earlier, before it became an emergency. Your pride almost killed him, Taylor." The words were like a knife between my ribs. That's not fair. Isn't it? He moved closer, looming over me, and I had to fight the urge to shrink back. You want to talk about fair? You want to discuss what's fair? I missed his birth, his first smile, his first word. 2 years of memories I can never get back because you decided I wasn't worthy of being his father. So don't talk to me about fair. I was scared, I admitted, my voice breaking. I was terrified, Thomas, of you, of your world, of what might happen to him. I saw violence in you and I couldn't risk my baby. Something in my words made him pause. He crouched down in front of me, bringing his eyes level with mine, and I saw the dangerous man recede slightly, replaced by something more human. I would never hurt him, Thomas said quietly, intensely. I would die before I let anything happen to that little boy. He's mine, Taylor. My blood, my son. There is nothing in this world I wouldn't do to keep him safe. But your world isn't safe, I pointed out. You said it yourself. Rivals who would use him as leverage. People who want to hurt you by hurting what you love. How is that better than what we had? Because what you had was an illusion, Thomas said. You thought you were keeping him safe by keeping him away from me. But you were just making him vulnerable in a different way. At least with me, he has protection. Resources. A father who will burn the world down before he lets anyone touch him. The intensity in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. This was the Thomas I'd fallen in love with, the one who approached everything with absolute commitment. Whether it was business or pleasure or apparently fatherhood, he gave it everything. I need time, I said, to think, to process all of this. You can't just make demands and expect me to fall in line. You're right, Thomas surprised me by saying. You deserve time. So here's what's going to happen. Theo stays in the hospital for a week, maybe longer. During that time, we'll both be here with him. You'll see how I am with him, how serious I am about being his father. And we'll negotiate terms. Terms, I repeated flatly. Living arrangements, custody, finances, security, all the practical realities that come with our situation. He stood, and I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. I'm not unreasonable, Taylor. I'm not going to lock you in a tower and throw away the key, but I am going to be part of my son's life. That's non-negotiable. I wanted to argue, to fight, to maintain some illusion of control over my life. But the exhaustion was too much. And beneath it, I could feel the foundations of my resistance crumbling. Because as much as I hated to admit it, Thomas was right. Theo deserved better than what I'd been able to give him alone. He deserved a father. He deserved security and stability and a future that wasn't defined by struggle. 1 week, I agreed quietly. We have 1 week to figure this out. But Thomas, if I feel for even a second that Theo is in danger because of your world, I'm gone. I'll disappear again, and this time you won't find us. It was an empty threat, and we both knew it. His resources far outweighed my ability to hide, but he nodded anyway, granting me the dignity of pretending I still had power in this situation. Fair enough, he said. Now, you're going to that hotel room I arranged. You're going to sleep for at least 8 hours. I'll stay with Theo. If anything changes, if he needs you, I'll call immediately. I can't leave him, I protested, but my body betrayed me with a jaw-cracking yawn. You can, and you will, Thomas said firmly. He's going to need you to be strong over the next few days. You can't do that running on fumes. Let me do this, Taylor. Let me take care of both of you, even if it's just for tonight. The offer was tempting, so tempting. When was the last time someone had taken care of me, had worried about whether I was sleeping enough, eating enough, coping? Even before Theo, even in those brief months with Thomas, I'd always been the one managing everything, planning, worrying, keeping all the plates spinning. Okay, I whispered. But you call me if anything. I'll call, he promised. Now go. Rest. I've got him. I stood on unsteady legs, and Thomas's hand was immediately at my elbow, steadying me. For a moment we stood close enough that I could feel his breath on my face, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Close enough to remember what it had been like between us before fear had driven me away. Taylor, he said softly, I know you're scared. I know you don't trust me. But I meant what I said in there. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, I'm going to prove to you that I can be the father Theo deserves. And maybe. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. Maybe we can figure out what we are to each other, too. I pulled away before I could do something stupid like lean into him, like let myself remember what we'd had before everything fell apart. One day at a time, Thomas. That's all I can handle right now. One day at a time, he agreed. He walked me to the hotel across the street, his security trailing discreetly behind us. The room he'd arranged was beautiful, far nicer than anywhere I'd stayed in years. A king-sized bed with crisp white sheets, a marble bathroom, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the city skyline. Sleep, Thomas ordered gently. I'll see you in the morning. After he left, I stood at the window for a long moment, looking out at the glittering city. Somewhere out there was the life I'd built, small and struggling but mine. And somewhere behind me, across the street in that hospital, was my son and the man I'd loved and feared in equal measure. I didn't know what the future held. Didn't know if I'd made the right choice in contacting Thomas, in letting him back into our lives. But as I finally crawled into that impossibly soft bed and let exhaustion pull me under, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. I woke to late morning sunlight streaming through the hotel windows and the disorienting sensation of having slept deeply for the first time in months. The clock on the nightstand read 10:47 a.m. I'd slept for nearly 12 hours straight, my body claiming the rest it had been denied for so long. For a brief, peaceful moment, I simply lay there, cocooned in expensive sheets, my mind blissfully blank. Then reality crashed back in. Theo, the hospital, Thomas. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my heart racing with sudden panic. What if something had happened while I slept? What if Theo had needed me and I hadn't been there? But my screen showed only 2 messages, both from Thomas. The first, sent at 3 a.m. He's sleeping peacefully. Vitals all normal. Rest. The second, from an hour ago, he's awake and asking for you. No rush. Everything's fine. The casual tone of the messages, the calm reassurance, did something strange to my chest. This was Thomas as a father, putting my worries at ease, keeping me informed. Not Thomas the crime boss, not Thomas the dangerous man I'd run from. Just a dad, taking care of his son and checking in with the mother. I showered quickly in the marble bathroom, using the luxury products the hotel provided, and trying not to think about how much this room must cost per night. My clothes from yesterday had been cleaned and pressed, hung neatly in the closet by some invisible housekeeping staff. Another sign of Thomas's reach, his ability to arrange things with a phone call or a word to the right person. The walk across to the hospital felt different in daylight. The October air was crisp, carrying the smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, and the ever-present undercurrent of exhaust and humanity that defined New York. Normal people went about their normal lives around me, unaware that my entire world had shifted on its axis in the past 24 hours. Thomas's security was obvious now that I knew to look for it. The man in the suit reading a newspaper near the hospital entrance. The woman in scrubs who tracked my movement with professional assessment. They were protecting Theo, I realized, and by extension, protecting me. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded me of the cage I was walking back into. Theo's room was different from when I'd left it. Someone had brought in toys, a stuffed lion that was nearly as big as Theo himself, colorful books stacked on the windowsill, a mobile of planets and stars hanging from the ceiling above his bed. The sterile hospital room had been transformed into something more suited for a child, bright and engaging and warm. Thomas sat in the chair beside Theo's bed, reading from one of the new books. His voice was animated, doing different voices for the characters in a way that made Theo giggle. The sound of my son's laughter, clear and happy, despite the IV in his arm and the surgical recovery, made my throat tight with emotion. And then the dragon said, Thomas rumbled in a theatrical, deep voice, "Who dares enter my cave?" "The brave knight," Theo supplied enthusiastically, his small hands waving, "with his sword." "That's right, the brave knight with his—" Thomas looked up and saw me in the doorway. Something shifted in his expression, became softer, more open. "Mama's here." "Mama." Theo's face lit up and he held out his arms. I crossed the room quickly, careful as I hugged him, mindful of his incision and his IV line. "Hi, baby. How are you feeling?" "Better," he announced proudly. "The doctor lady came and said I'm doing really good. And Dad brought me toys. Look, Mama, a lion. His name is Roar." "Dad." The word came so easily to him, as if Thomas had been part of his life from the beginning. Children were adaptable like that, able to accept new realities with a flexibility that adults had long since lost. I met Thomas's eyes over Theo's head, saw the pride and wonder there. "That's a great name," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "And what else did you and Dad do while I was sleeping?" "We had breakfast," Theo reported. "Pancakes, with syrup and strawberries. And we watched cartoons. And Dad told me about his house. He has a big house, Mama, with an elevator inside. It's a penthouse," Thomas clarified, "and there's plenty of room for both of you. I was thinking, Theo, maybe after you're all better, you and Mama could come see it. We could set up a room just for you, with whatever toys you want." I shot Thomas a warning look. We hadn't discussed this, hadn't agreed to anything. But Theo was already bouncing with excitement, as much as he could while still recovering from surgery. "Really? My own room? Can I have race cars? And blocks? And—" He paused, thinking hard. "And a nightlight that looks like stars? Anything you want," Thomas promised, his voice thick with emotion. A nurse came in to check Theo's vitals and administer his medications, giving me a moment to step into the hallway with Thomas. The moment the door closed behind us, I turned on him. "You can't make promises like that," I hissed, keeping my voice low. "We haven't decided anything yet." "He's a child who's just had surgery and is stuck in a hospital room," Thomas countered calmly. "I'm giving him something to look forward to, something to help him through the recovery. What's wrong with that? What's wrong is that you're manipulating him, bribing him with toys and promises to—" "To what?" Thomas interrupted. "To love his father? To want to spend time with me?" "That's not manipulation, Taylor. That's called being a parent. Something I've missed 2 years of doing, in case you've forgotten." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. He wielded it expertly, precisely, knowing exactly where I was vulnerable. And the worst part was that he was right. I couldn't deny him the chance to be Theo's father, not without being the villain in this story. "Fine," I said tightly. "But we're still discussing terms. Living arrangements, custody, all of it. Nothing is decided." "Of course," Thomas agreed, but there was satisfaction in his eyes. He knew he was winning, slowly but surely shifting the ground beneath my feet, until I had no choice but to move in the direction he wanted. We returned to Theo's room, where he was showing the nurse his new lion. The rest of the morning passed in a strange sort of domestic normalcy. We took turns reading to Theo, playing simple games, helping him eat lunch when the hospital food arrived. Thomas had arranged for something better. Of course, a meal from some upscale restaurant that catered to children, chicken fingers that were actually tender and flavorful, fruit that was fresh and perfectly ripe. Dr. Volker came by in the early afternoon to examine Theo. She was pleased with his progress, his incision healing cleanly, no signs of infection. If he continues improving at this rate, we might be able to discharge him in 5 or 6 days instead of a full week, she told us. He's a resilient little guy. He gets that from his mother, Thomas said, and the compliment caught me off guard. After Dr. Volker left, Theo dozed off again. The medications and his body's need to heal, pulling him into sleep. Thomas gestured toward the small sitting area in the corner of the room, and I followed him there, settling into one of the comfortable chairs someone had brought in to replace the standard hospital furniture. We need to talk about the future, Thomas said, without preamble. Real talk, not just arguing about whether you'll accept my help. Okay, I agreed. Talk. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. I want to be clear about what I'm offering. Not as a threat, not as some kind of coercion, but as a genuine solution to our situation. You and Theo move into my penthouse. You get your own space, your own rooms, complete privacy when you want it. I'm not asking you to share my bed, Taylor. I'm not asking for anything from you except the chance to be a father to my son. And what do? I asked. Just exist in your home like some kind of ornamental addition? You take care of Theo, Thomas said. You pursue whatever interests you want to pursue. Go back to school if you'd like. The nursing program you mentioned once, remember? You wanted to be an RN, not just an aide. I can make that happen. Or anything else you want to do. You'd have the resources to build whatever life you want, without the constant stress of wondering how you'll pay rent or afford groceries. It sounded like a dream, like every desperate fantasy I'd had during the long nights of struggling alone. But dreams from Thomas always came with hidden costs, invisible strings that wouldn't become apparent until I was too tangled to escape. And in exchange? I prompted. In exchange, Theo grows up knowing his father. He has stability, security, opportunities. He goes to the best schools, has the best medical care, never has to worry about money or safety. Thomas paused, his expression softening. And maybe, eventually, we figure out if there's still something between us. Or maybe we don't. Maybe we just become friends who are co-parenting our son. Either way, we do what's best for him. What about your world? I asked. The danger you mentioned, the rivals who would use him as leverage. Does that just disappear because we're living in your penthouse? No, Thomas admitted. But it becomes manageable. Right now, you and Theo are vulnerable because you're out there, unprotected. Anyone who wanted to hurt me could grab you off the street, and I wouldn't even know until it was too late. Under my roof, with my security, that becomes exponentially harder. Not impossible, but harder. And I'd know immediately if there was a threat. The logic was sound, even as I hated it. I had been vulnerable, living in that tiny apartment with its flimsy locks and its exposure to the street. Any of Thomas's enemies could have found us if they'd been looking. The only thing that had protected us was my anonymity, and that was gone now. I need to think about it, I said finally. This is a huge decision, Thomas. I can't just agree to upend our entire lives based on one conversation. Take your time, Thomas said. You have until Theo is discharged. That gives you several days to decide. But Taylor... He reached out and took my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles in a gesture that was both familiar and devastating. I meant what I said. I'm not trying to trap you. I'm trying to take care of you both, the way I should have been doing all along, if you'd given me the chance. Before I could respond, my phone rang. An unknown number, which I normally wouldn't answer, but something made me swipe to accept the call. Hello? Is this Taylor Reynolds? A woman's voice, professional and crisp. Yes, who is this? My name is Amanda Kirsch. I'm a social worker with New York Child Protective Services. I've received a report regarding your son, Theodore Reyes, and I need to schedule a home visit to assess his living situation. The blood drained from my face. A report? What kind of report? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, but it concerns allegations of neglect, specifically regarding delayed medical care and inadequate living conditions. I'll need to inspect your home and interview both you and Theodore. Can we schedule something for later this week? I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Someone had reported me to CPS. Someone thought I was an unfit mother, that Theo wasn't safe with me. Thomas plucked the phone from my numb fingers. This is Thomas Benedetti. I'm Theodore's father. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I couldn't hear what the social worker was saying, but I watched Thomas's expression harden, become calculating and cold. The crime boss emerging from behind the concerned father. I see, he said coolly. And you're aware that Theodore just underwent emergency surgery? That he's currently recovering in the hospital under the care of one of the best pediatric surgical teams in the country? That hardly sounds like neglect to me. A pause. Yes, I understand you have to investigate. But let me be very clear. Any attempt to remove Theodore from his mother's care will be met with immediate legal action. I have an entire firm of lawyers who specialize in family law, and they're very, very good at their jobs. He listened for another moment, then ended the call. When he handed my phone back to me, his expression was grim. Someone called CPS on you, he said unnecessarily. Made a report about neglect. Who would do that? I whispered. Why? Thomas's jaw clenched. Someone who wants to hurt me by hurting what's mine. Someone who knows that the fastest way to get to me is through Theo. This is exactly what I was talking about, Taylor. This is the danger. But how would they even know about Theo? We've only been here for a day. Because I was here, Thomas said grimly. Because I dropped everything and flew to this hospital the moment you texted me. People pay attention to what I do, where I go, who I care about. And now they know I have a son. The cage was closing. I could feel it, the walls drawing in, the options narrowing. If I refused Thomas's protection, refused to move into his penthouse, I'd be fighting CPS alone. With my spotty employment history, my bare-bones apartment, my complete lack of resources, how long would it take before they decided Theo would be better off in foster care? This was your plan, I accused. But there was no heat in it, just tired resignation. No, Thomas said firmly. This was not my plan. I would never use CPS to manipulate you, Taylor. I don't need to. But someone out there is trying to force my hand, and yours, and the only way to fight it is together. He was right. God, how I hated that he was right. If I agree to this, I said slowly, if we move in with you, I want rules, boundaries, my own space that you don't enter without permission. No interference with how I parent Theo, and I want a legal agreement, something that protects me if things go wrong. Done, Thomas agreed immediately. I'll have my lawyers draw something up. Whatever you need to feel safe, you'll have it. I looked over at Theo, sleeping peacefully in his hospital bed, blissfully unaware of the forces aligning around him. My brave little boy who had faced surgery without complaint, who had accepted his father with open arms, who deserved so much better than the constant struggle I'd been providing. Okay, I whispered. We'll try it. For Theo. Thomas's relief was palpable. "For Theo," he agreed. But as he pulled out his phone to start making arrangements, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just signed away more than I realized, that the life I'd built, small and struggling in mine, was disappearing behind me like a dream upon waking. And there was no going back. The next 3 days passed in a strange blur of hospital routines and Thomas's overwhelming presence. He'd taken over a second room down the hall, converting it into a makeshift command center where he conducted business between visits with Theo. I'd catch glimpses of him on phone calls, his voice sharp and authoritative, discussing shipments and territories and things I didn't want to understand. Then he'd walk back into Theo's room and transform instantly, becoming gentle and playful, building block towers and making silly voices that sent our son into fits of giggles. The duality was disorienting. I kept trying to reconcile the two versions of him, the dangerous man who ran a criminal empire and the devoted father who sat for hours reading picture books. They existed simultaneously in the same body, and I didn't know which one was real, or if maybe they both were. Theo was healing faster than anyone expected. Dr. Volker reduced his pain medications, upgraded him to solid foods, and talked seriously about discharge in 2 more days instead of the week we'd originally anticipated. My son was resilient, bouncing back with the remarkable elasticity of childhood, but I could see him getting restless, tired of the confined space, yearning for normalcy. "When can we go home, Mama?" he asked for the dozenth time, and each time the question felt like a knife because I didn't have an answer anymore. Home wasn't our tiny apartment in Queens. Home was going to be Thomas's penthouse, a place I'd never seen, in a life I hadn't agreed to until 3 days ago. On the 4th morning, Thomas arrived with a visitor. A woman in an expensive suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to be. "Taylor, this is Margaret Chen, my attorney," Thomas introduced. "She's drawn up the agreement we discussed." We moved to the consultation room while Theo watched cartoons under the supervision of one of Thomas's security team. Margaret spread papers across the table, her manner briskly professional as she walked me through the document. It was more generous than I'd expected. I'd have my own suite in the penthouse, complete privacy, a monthly stipend that made my head spin. Thomas would cover all of Theo's expenses, my expenses, anything we needed. In return, I agreed to live under his roof and allow him equal parenting time with Theo. There were provisions for what would happen if we couldn't make it work, protections for me and Theo if I decided to leave, guarantees of continued financial support regardless of our relationship status. "This clause here," Margaret pointed to a section near the end. "This states that Mr. Benedetti will take no action to prevent you from leaving with Theodore, provided you remain within New York State and allow regular visitation. He's essentially giving you an exit strategy that doesn't leave you destitute." I looked at Thomas, surprised. "You'd really let us go?" "I'd prefer you to stay," he said carefully. "I'd prefer we make this work. But I'm not going to imprison you, Taylor. If you're truly unhappy, if this arrangement isn't working for you or for Theo, then yes, you can leave. With support. With resources. I just want to be in my son's life. How that looks is something we can figure out together." It was more than fair. It was shockingly reasonable. I signed the papers with a hand that only trembled slightly, committing myself to this new reality. The CPS visit happened that afternoon. Amanda Kirsch was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with kind eyes that assessed everything with professional detachment. She interviewed me first, asking questions about Theo's medical history, our living situation, my employment. I answered honestly, explaining the circumstances that had led to the delayed medical care, my financial struggles, my efforts to provide for my son, despite overwhelming obstacles. Then she spoke with Thomas, whose answers were measured and strategic. He emphasized his commitment to Theo's welfare, his resources, his intention to provide stability. He managed to sound both responsible and commanding, a man who would move mountains for his child. Finally, she spent time with Theo, who was his usual charming self. He showed her his lion, told her about the cartoons he'd been watching, mentioned his new dad with innocent enthusiasm. I watched through the window as Amanda smiled at something he said, her expression softening. When she emerged, her assessment was brief. Based on what I've seen and the current living arrangements being proposed, I don't find sufficient evidence of neglect to warrant removal. The case will remain open for 60 days with follow-up visits, but Theodore appears healthy, happy, and well cared for. Mr. Benedetti, I trust you'll ensure that continues. You have my word, Thomas said solemnly. After she left, I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt the final lock clicking into place on the cage. The threat had been neutralized, but only because I'd agreed to Thomas's terms. Only because I'd surrendered my independence in exchange for security. That evening, after Theo had fallen asleep, Thomas suggested we take a walk. The hospital had a rooftop garden, little used this time of year but accessible through a service elevator. His security cleared it first, then gave us privacy from a discreet distance. The October night was cool, the city sprawling below us in a carpet of lights. I wrapped my arms around myself, and Thomas shrugged out of his jacket without a word, draping it over my shoulders. It smelled like him, expensive cologne and something indefinably masculine that made my stomach flutter with remembered desire. Tell me the truth, I said quietly. How bad is your world? How dangerous is it really? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the railing as he stared out at the city. You want the sanitized version, or the reality? The reality. I need to know what I'm bringing Theo into. He sighed. I run one of the largest criminal organizations on the East Coast. We control territories, manage operations, handle conflicts with rival families. The Italians, the Russians, the Irish, we all have our zones of influence. Sometimes those zones overlap, and when they do, people get hurt. I've hurt people, Taylor. I've ordered things done that would horrify you. I've made choices that keep me up at night. The honesty was brutal, but I'd asked for it. Have you killed people? Yes. No hesitation, no justification. Just the simple, terrible truth. I should have been horrified, should have grabbed Theo and run as far as I could. But I'd already known, hadn't I? Some part of me had always understood what Thomas was, even when I'd been trying to convince myself otherwise. Does it bother you? I asked. The things you've done? Sometimes, he admitted. Late at night, when the world is quiet, and I can't escape my own thoughts. But I don't have the luxury of regret, Taylor. What's done is done. All I can do is move forward and try to build something better. For Theo. For you, if you'll let me. What if I can't live with it? The question came out small, vulnerable. What if I try and I can't get past what you are? Thomas turned to face me, his expression intense in the dim light. Then we figure out another solution. But I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. You've survived 2 years on your own, raised an incredible child, built a life from nothing. You're not fragile, Taylor. You're fierce. And maybe, just maybe, you understand better than most that the world isn't black and white, that people can be complicated, that someone can be both dangerous and devoted. He stepped closer, and I should have moved back, but I didn't. Couldn't. I never stopped thinking about you, he said quietly. 2 years, and I never stopped looking. I had people searching everywhere, following every lead, hoping for just a trace of where you'd gone. Finding nothing was torture. But finding you, finding out about Theo, It's given me something I didn't know I was missing. Purpose beyond the business. Something worth protecting more than territory or profit. Thomas. I didn't know what I wanted to say. That I'd thought about him too. That there were nights I'd lain awake remembering the feel of his hands on my skin, the sound of his voice in my ear. That running from him had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, and staying away had required every ounce of willpower I possessed. He reached up and cupped my face gently, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. I'm not asking you to love me again. I know I lost that right when I let you see the violence in me. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to be better, to be the man you and Theo deserve. Before I could respond, his phone rang. He cursed softly, pulling it out to check the screen. His expression darkened immediately. I have to take this, he said, already stepping away. Marco, what is it? I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I watched Thomas's posture change, become rigid with tension. When? A pause. How many? Another pause, longer this time. Lock it down. Nobody moves until I get there. And double security on the hospital. If anyone even looks at this building wrong, I want to know about it. He ended the call and turned back to me, his expression grim. There's a situation. I need to handle it personally. What kind of situation? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The kind that requires my immediate attention, Thomas said evasively. I'll have extra security posted outside Theo's room. You'll be safe here, I promise. But I need to go now. Fear spiked through me. Thomas, what's happening? He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. The Russians made a move on one of my warehouses. 3 of my people are in the hospital, 2 more are missing. This is retaliation for something I did last month, a message that they're not backing down. I need to respond, and I need to do it in person. Respond how? But I already knew the answer. However I need to, Thomas said flatly. The crime boss was fully present now, the gentle father buried beneath layers of authority and violence. I'll be back by morning. Stay here, stay safe, and don't open that door for anyone except hospital staff you recognize. He kissed my forehead, a brief press of lips that somehow felt more intimate than anything else. And then he was gone. I stood alone on the rooftop, his jacket still wrapped around my shoulders, watching his security team mobilize and depart like a small army. This was my future. This uncertainty. This violence lurking just beneath the surface of everyday life. Thomas leaving in the middle of the night to handle situations that could get him killed. Raising Theo in the shadow of a world where people disappeared and messages were sent through bloodshed. I went back to Theo's room, where he slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing around him. 2 security guards now stood outside the door instead of 1, both armed, both watching the corridor with professional vigilance. Inside, I curled up in the chair next to Theo's bed and pulled Thomas's jacket tighter around myself. It still smelled like him, and I hated myself a little for taking comfort in that. I'd signed the papers, made the agreement, committed to trying this impossible arrangement. Now I just had to figure out how to live with the consequences. The night stretched long and sleepless ahead of me, punctuated by the steady beep of Theo's monitors and the soft footsteps of nurses making their rounds. I watched my son sleep and wondered what kind of life I was building for him. What kind of man he'd become, growing up with Thomas Benedetti as his father. And somewhere in the darkest hours before dawn, I admitted something I'd been denying for 2 years. Despite everything, despite the fear and the violence and the impossibility of it all, part of me had never stopped loving Thomas. That love was tangled with terror and resentment, and 1,000 complicated emotions I couldn't begin to name. But it was there. It had always been there, and that terrified me most of all. Thomas didn't return by morning. The sun rose over the city, painting the hospital windows gold and pink, and his side of Theo's room remained empty. I tried not to imagine what that meant, tried not to picture scenarios where he'd been hurt or killed in whatever confrontation he'd walked into. But my mind went there anyway, spinning out possibilities that made my chest tight with anxiety I had no right to feel. Theo woke cheerful and hungry, asking immediately where his dad was. I manufactured a smile and told him Thomas had business to handle, that he'd be back soon. My son accepted this with the easy trust of a child who'd never been disappointed by a father before. I envied him that innocence. Dr. Volker came by mid-morning with excellent news. Theo's incision was healing beautifully. His blood work was perfect, and he could be discharged the following day if he continued to improve. "He's a remarkable little fighter," she said warmly. "You should be very proud." "I am," I managed, though pride was buried somewhere beneath the exhaustion and worry. It was nearly noon when Thomas finally appeared in the doorway. He looked like he'd been through a war. His clothes were different from what he'd worn last night, but his face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes, a cut on his jaw that hadn't been there before. There was dried blood on his knuckles that he hadn't quite managed to wash away. "Dad!" Theo's face lit up, oblivious to the signs of violence written across Thomas's body. "Hey, buddy," Thomas said, his voice rough with exhaustion. But he crossed to Theo's bed and ruffled his hair gently, the gesture achingly tender. "How are you feeling?" "Good. The doctor said I can go home tomorrow. To your house with the elevator." "That's great news," Thomas said, and I could hear him forcing enthusiasm into his tone. "We'll have to make sure your room is all ready for you." He glanced at me over Theo's head, and I saw the weight of whatever had happened last night pressing down on him. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked quietly. "In the hall?" I nodded, my stomach knotting with dread. We stepped outside, leaving Theo with one of the security guards who'd learned to play simple card games with him. Thomas led me to the consultation room we'd used before, closing the door behind us. "What happened?" I asked immediately. Thomas sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 32 years and then some. "The Russians wanted to send a message. They hit one of my operations hard enough to hurt, but not hard enough to start an all-out war. It was calculated, strategic, a reminder that they can reach me whenever they want." "The people who were hurt," I pressed. "Are they okay?" "2 will be fine. 1's in ICU. The 2 who were missing." He paused, his jaw clenching. "We found them. They didn't make it." The casual way he said it, like he was discussing business losses instead of human lives, made something cold settle in my stomach. "And what did you do? How did you respond?" Thomas met my eyes, and I saw something bleak in his expression. "I did what I had to do to make sure they understand that touching my people has consequences, to make sure they think twice before they come after what's mine again." Which means you don't want details, Taylor. Trust me on that. But I did want details. I needed to understand exactly what I was signing up for, what Theo would be growing up around. "Tell me anyway." He studied me for a long moment, then sighed. 3 of theirs for 2 of mine. That's the math of it, the currency we deal in. I made it clear that any further aggression would be met with exponentially greater force. And he hesitated. I may have made it personal with their second in command. Sent a message that got delivered in a way that won't be forgotten. The clinical way he discussed violence made my skin crawl. But beneath my horror was a traitorous sense of security. This was what Thomas did, who he was. And that same capacity for violence that terrified me was also what would keep Theo safe. Keep us both safe. "Is it over?" I asked. "The threat?" "For now," Thomas said. "They'll back off, reassess. Maybe try again in a few months, maybe not. That's how it works. There's always tension, always the possibility of conflict." but I've made it clear that Theo is off limits. That going after my family will result in total war. Most of them are smart enough to respect that line. Most of them. Most of them, he confirmed grimly. I moved to the window, looking out at the city spread below us. Somewhere out there were the people Thomas had killed last night. Someone's sons. Maybe someone's fathers. Lives ended because they'd made the mistake of working for the wrong organization, being in the wrong place, threatening what Thomas claimed as his. I can't do this, I whispered. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. I heard Thomas stand, heard his footsteps as he crossed to stand behind me. But he didn't touch me, didn't try to change my mind with proximity or persuasion. Can't do what? He asked quietly. This. Any of this. Live in your world, raise Theo around violence and death and people who think killing is just business. I turned to face him, tears burning in my eyes. I can't watch you leave in the middle of the night and wonder if you're coming back. I can't explain to our son why his father has blood on his hands. I can't. Then I'll stop. The words were so unexpected that they knocked the breath from my lungs. What? Thomas's expression was fierce, determined, a man who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. I'll stop. All of it. The business, the territory, the violence. I'll walk away. You can't just walk away from a criminal empire, Thomas. It doesn't work like that. It does if you're willing to pay the price, he said. I've been building an exit strategy for years. Arrangements with other families to divide up my territory. Legitimate businesses to transition into. I never thought I'd use it, but... He reached out and took my hands in his, and I was too shocked to pull away. I never had a reason to before. Now I do. I have a son who needs a father who comes home at night. I have a woman I love who can't live with what I am. So I'll become something else. You love me? The words came out barely above a whisper. I never stopped, Thomas said simply. 2 years, Taylor. 2 years of looking for you. Wondering if you were safe, if you were happy, if you'd moved on. Finding you again, finding out about Theo, it made me realize what I'd been missing. What I threw away when I let you see the darkness in me without showing you that there could be light too. I wanted to believe him. Wanted it so desperately it hurt. People don't just change, Thomas. Not fundamentally. You've built your entire adult life around this world. Who would you even be without it? I guess we'd find out together, he said, if you're willing to give me that chance. Before I could respond, shouting erupted in the hallway. Thomas's expression transformed instantly, become hard and alert. He moved toward the door with predatory grace, and I followed, my heart racing. One of the security guards was on his radio, his voice urgent. All units, code red. Unauthorized individuals approaching pediatric wing. 3 hostiles, armed, moving fast. Thomas's face went white. Theo. We ran. Down the corridor, Thomas ahead of me, his hand going to something concealed beneath his jacket. The security guard outside Theo's room had his weapon drawn, positioned protectively in front of the door. Inside, I could hear Theo crying, frightened by the sudden tension and shouting. 3 men appeared at the end of the hallway, and I recognized them instantly from the descriptions Thomas had given me. Russians. They'd come for Theo, come to take him as leverage or worse. They didn't have weapons visible, smart enough not to brandish guns in a hospital, but I could see the bulges under their jackets. Back off, Thomas said, his voice carrying absolute authority. You don't want to do this. Not here, not now. The lead man, scarred and cold-eyed, smiled without humor. We're just here to visit a sick child. That's allowed, yes? We heard Thomas Benedetti's son was here. We wanted to pay respects. You've made your point, Thomas said, and I could hear the control it was taking for him to keep his voice steady. Now leave, and maybe we can pretend this didn't happen. Or maybe we finish what we started, the man said. Take the boy. See how negotiations go when you have something real to lose. Everything happened at once. Thomas moved, inhumanly fast, closing the distance between himself and the Russians. His security team converged from both ends of the corridor. Hospital staff scattered, screaming. And I did the only thing I could think of. I threw open the door to Theo's room and ran to my son. He was terrified, clutching his stuffed lion, tears streaming down his face. Mama, what's happening? It's okay, baby, I lied, scooping him up despite the pull on his incision. We're going to play a game. We're going to hide, and you have to be very, very quiet. Can you do that for Mama? He nodded against my shoulder, and I looked around desperately for somewhere, anywhere, to protect him. The bathroom. I carried him there, locked the door, and huddled with him in the corner furthest from the entrance. Through the door, I could hear sounds of fighting, shouts and impacts, and something that might have been gunfire. Theo whimpered against my chest, and I held him tighter, one hand over his ear to muffle the sounds, my body curved protectively around his small form. This was my fault. I'd brought Thomas back into our lives, and this was the consequence. Violence, terror, our son traumatized in what should have been a place of healing. Then, silence. Horrible, ringing silence that was somehow worse than the chaos. The bathroom door rattled. Taylor, it's me. It's safe. Thomas's voice strained but alive. I stood on shaking legs, Theo still in my arms, and unlocked the door. Thomas looked like he'd been through hell. His shirt was torn, blood on his face from a split lip, his knuckles raw and bleeding. But he was upright, functional, and his eyes went immediately to Theo with desperate concern. Is he hurt? No, I managed. Scared but not hurt. What happened? They're contained. Hospital security is handling it, and NYPD is on the way. The Russians won't be a problem anymore. The way he said it made me certain that at least some of those men wouldn't be leaving the hospital alive. Theo lifted his head from my shoulder, his eyes red and swollen from crying. Dad? Thomas crossed to us immediately, his large hands gentle as he touched Theo's back. I'm here, buddy. You're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you, I promise. I want to go home, Theo sobbed. Please, Mama, I want to go home. Tomorrow, baby, I soothed, though my own voice was shaking. Tomorrow we'll go home. But where was home now? Not our apartment in Queens, which would never be safe again. Not Thomas's penthouse, which represented a life I couldn't live. We were caught between worlds, and my son was paying the price for my choices. Dr. Volker appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed. We need to move Theodore to a different floor, somewhere more secure, and we need to check his incision, make sure the stress hasn't caused any damage. The next hours were a blur. Police interviews, hospital administrators, Thomas making phone calls with barely controlled fury in his voice. They moved us to a private wing normally reserved for celebrities and high-profile patients, with security that rivaled a military installation. Through it all, Theo clung to me, exhausted and frightened. He finally fell asleep in my arms, his small body twitching occasionally with bad dreams. I held him and stared at nothing, my mind numb with shock and exhaustion. Thomas appeared in the doorway near midnight. He'd showered, changed clothes, but the violence of the day was still written in the tension of his shoulders, the darkness in his eyes. They're all in custody, he said quietly. The ones who survived. And I've made arrangements. By morning, the Russians will know that touching my family is a line that can never be crossed again. More killing, I said flatly. More protection, Thomas corrected. Taylor, I know this was traumatic. I know it's exactly what you were afraid of. But it's also the last time it will happen. I've accelerated my exit from the business. By the end of the week, I'll have divested all my interests, transferred all my operations. I'm out. Completely out. Just like that? Just like that, he confirmed. Because you were right. This isn't a world for children. It's not a world for family. And I want a family more than I want power or territory or anything else this life has given me. I looked down at Theo, sleeping peacefully now despite everything that had happened. He asked for you, I said quietly. When he was scared, when everything was chaos, he called for his dad, not just me. Both of us. He needs both of us, Thomas said. And I need both of you. So whatever it takes, whatever I have to give up or change or become, I'll do it. Just don't shut me out again, Taylor. Don't take him away from me. Please. The plea in his voice broke something in me. This man who commanded empires, who made grown men tremble, was begging me for a chance. And I realized that I'd been wrong about something fundamental. Thomas hadn't changed because of Theo. He'd always had this capacity for love and devotion. I'd just been too afraid to see it before. Okay, I whispered. We'll try. Really try. Not just going through the motions. But Thomas, if you're lying about leaving the business, if this is just a manipulation to keep us close. It's not, he interrupted firmly. I swear to you, Taylor, on Theo's life, on everything I am, I'm done with that world. From now on, my only job is being a father. And if you'll let me, being whatever you need me to be. Theo stirred in my arms, making a small sound of distress. Both Thomas and I moved simultaneously to soothe him, our hands meeting over our son's small body. He settled again, comforted by both our presences. Tomorrow we go home, Thomas said softly. All three of us. To a new life, a clean start. No more running, no more hiding, no more fear. Just us, figuring out how to be a family. I looked at him across Theo's sleeping form, this dangerous, devoted, complicated man who'd upended my entire world. Just us, I agreed, and for the first time in 2 years, I believed it might actually be possible. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Thomas's penthouse, watching Theo play with his toy trucks in the living room beyond. The space had been transformed since we'd moved in. What had once been a bachelor's showcase of wealth and taste now had children's artwork on the refrigerator, toys scattered across expensive rugs, evidence of life and love in every corner. Thomas had kept his promise. He'd dissolved his organization methodically and completely, transferring operations to other families, cashing out investments, severing every tie to the criminal world he'd built. There had been challenges, negotiations, tense moments when I'd been certain violence would erupt. But somehow, through sheer force of will and strategic brilliance, he'd managed a clean exit. Now he ran a legitimate security consulting firm, using his expertise in protection and risk assessment to serve corporate clients and high-net-worth individuals. It was still dangerous occasionally, still required careful thinking and strategic planning. But it was legal, and more importantly, it let him come home every night. "Mama, look," Theo called, and I turned to see him demonstrating how his trucks could stack on top of each other. "Dad showed me." "That's amazing, baby," I called back, smiling. Thomas emerged from his home office, loosening his tie as he crossed to the kitchen. He came up behind me, his arms sliding around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. The gesture was familiar now, comfortable. We'd been taking things slowly, rebuilding trust, learning each other again. But there were moments like this when it felt like we'd never been apart. "Good day," he murmured against my ear. "Good day," I confirmed. I'd started nursing school last month, finally pursuing the dream I'd shelved years ago. With Thomas supporting us financially and sharing parenting duties, I had the time and space to build my own future. "I got a call from Margaret," Thomas said, and I felt him smile against my skin. The last of the legal paperwork went through. I'm officially, completely out. No outstanding obligations, no lingering connections. We're free. I turned in his arms, seeing the relief and pride in his expression. "How does it feel?" "Lighter," he admitted. "Like I can finally breathe properly for the first time in years." His hands came up to cup my face gently. "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a reason to change. For letting me be Theo's father. For not giving up on me even when you had every reason to." He paused, his dark eyes intense. "For loving me again, even though I didn't deserve it." "You earned it," I said simply. "Every day, with every choice you've made, you've earned it." He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. In the living room, Theo made explosion sounds with his trucks, completely oblivious to his parents in the kitchen. Our son, healthy and happy and safe. Our family, imperfect and hard-won and more precious than anything. Thomas Benedetti had been the most dangerous man in New York. Now he was just a father who read bedtime stories and built block towers and would do absolutely anything for his child. And maybe that was the most dangerous thing of all. The lengths a parent would go to, the lines they'd cross, the lives they'd remake. All for love, all for family, all for the future we were building together, one day at a time.